Pretty massive news for Mississippi high school football recruiting. We'll tell you exactly what that is, what it means for Ole Miss, and where do we go from here. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. I am your host, Stephen Willis. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for making us your first listen every day. The Locked On Ole Miss podcast, that is. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Check those out for us as well. Huge Mississippi high school football recruiting news as Jamonta Waller has received his fifth star, according to 24/7. Waller is out of Picayune, Mississippi. He has been a fast riser over the past couple of weeks, but it needs to be known that his rise all the way up to the number one player of the state was kind of unexpected. He was always a player everybody was looking at, but we just assumed that Kamarion Franklin just was entrenched as that number one player. Now, if you look at this, he's already compositing or consensusing, whatever you want to say, in these rankings at 121. If you look there and just pay attention to that, there ESPN has not ranked him. So he is able to get to that level without being ranked. On3 still has him as a high 3-star. This has not been re-ranked. Rivals ranked him at 184. He's a 4-star player, 5'8", but 247 Sports has him rated at 98, 22-player national, fifth linebacker in the country, number one player in Mississippi. Kind of impressive. Now, what does this mean? Ole Miss has been leading in this process, in my opinion, for weeks at this point. He likes what he has to hear from Ole Miss. We talk to John Garcia all the time about him. He is a new wave jack-type player, edge-type player. He's a perfect fit for what Ole Miss does. And looking at that, you can see like DJ Holmes, Chamberlain Campbell. There's a need there at Ole Miss. So there's a 5-star player in the state of Mississippi that is a huge need for Ole Miss. Does this mean Ole Miss is going to get him? No, it does not. Because all the big boys are going to start to come into Ole Miss now that there are 2 5-star players in that state. And honestly, we may not be done yet. We are still in evaluation season. There's still players that are going to make a move over the next couple of weeks. It's just the way it is. It's the way that recruiting works. Recruiting, as somebody that worked there, heck, I was there for nearly 10 years. February to May, that's an evaluation period. Even though signing day has moved up, they haven't really changed necessarily what they do. So there's going to be surprise players and finds that happens up until May. After that, it's time to start narrowing in to what, your rankings need to be to try and get them as right as possible, because you do care about being as right as possible, even though 100% is never an option. And Chris Jones type players can still pop up, especially in the state of Mississippi. So you want to be as thorough as you can during that first evaluation period. But if you're surprised, if there are players being hidden from you, that's understandable as well. But we'll see exactly how this goes. Jamonta Waller getting that 5th star, massive, absolutely huge. He's at Auburn this weekend. Like I said, other schools are going to come in for these players because there's basically a wealth of talent that is going on inside the state of Mississippi at the moment. And because of that, you're going to have to deal with Georgia. You're going to have to deal with Alabama, even schools like Auburn, Arkansas, LSU. They're all going to raid Mississippi's borders. And it's going to be up to Lane Kiffin to recruit these players really well. Just the way it is. You need to put your best foot forward in recruiting. Are you going to get them all? No, there's some kids that just don't want to go there. But Jamonta Waller has shown an interest level in Ole Miss. Honestly, at this point, I think Ole Miss should have an advantage with him. Do they? I do not know. Will they get him? I do not know. But they're in as good a position right now as they can possibly be in at a position of need. So this becomes the priority player, maybe even more than Cam Franklin, in the state of Mississippi for Ole Miss in this class. Period. You need to put all your eggs in this basket. You need to do whatever you can to get this kid to Oxford. And you need to also recruit Chris Davis. I like him as well. Both of the kids out of Picayune are really unique players and can potentially help Ole Miss out quite a bit. I'm really excited about what this class is doing. Everybody gives the 2019 class, the Nakobe Dean class, because there's a few top-end players that did not go to Ole Miss. You still have, this Mississippi-made class got you to the Sugar Bowl. That doesn't need to be overlooked. It got you to levels that, heck, 10 years ago was unheard of. Now, it's turned into a twice-a-decade event. Ole Miss going to Access Bowls. Ole Miss routinely in the top 20 conversation when people were talking about it. That's because we're recruiting at a different level. That's because we are paying at a different level. And that's because we're treating athletics like it is a different level than what it was. When people compare what Ole Miss football was in 2001, 2002, it's not even recognizable to what it is now. I'm a huge David Cutcliffe guy. He came on my radio show when I was stationed in Italy. He did that for a nobody halfway across the world. He gave his time up, came up there, talked about it. I will always respect and go to the mattresses for David Cutcliffe for what he did. I came back after that. That interview was so influential in my career that I came back and immediately got a job working for Ole Miss. So much of what I have done and was built was off of that interview. But Ole Miss football at that time frame, not even recognizable compared to what it is today. Program everything, the whole 9 yards. The athletic budget for Ole Miss Rebels athletics in 2006 was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 million. Now it's up $110 million. That's just 15 years later. But it was at the point when I was there, I had to justify every single tape that I wanted to buy. Could I not record over a current tape? Stuff like that, just to make sure that was the cost-saving guardrails that were put into place by an academic or athletic administration that was not bringing in that much revenue. Now, just go drive around that campus and look at the buildings that have popped up. Just go see all of that stuff. Mississippi football is at the high school level is rising, but at the same time, Division I, high-level football in the state is rising as well. Mississippi State's in the same boat. And it's all because of this TV money coming in. And now, I think that eventually this TV money is going to dry up a little bit, and we're going to talk about Lou Spanos being hired as a new analyst in the next segment. But part of that, we're going to talk about this TV money is about to dry up. It's just not sustainable. It's not matching what's happening in other parts of the country. And whenever that happens, it's a bubble. And when it bursts, it's going to burst. It just is. But anyway, just want to let you know that today's show is brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook. The tournament is heating up, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook because customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet does not win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Yes, I realize that in the state of Mississippi, it is required that you go to a brick-and-mortar casino to gamble on the sports. Yes. But if you go to Memphis, if you go to Jackson, Tennessee, if you road trip into Nashville, going to New Orleans, or even skipping across the river in Delta, Louisiana, heading over to Monroe or Shreveport or anything like that, you can use the FanDuel Sports app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. You can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers to three string. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with same game parlay. So don't miss your chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel. It's an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Also, thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Make sure you check out our brand new podcast, Locked On College Basketball. Everything you need to know about college basketball in one place, plus hear from big name experts, insiders, coaches, and players. Locked On College Basketball. It's available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Also, check out Locked On Women's College Basketball. That show's available as well. Also, wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. So search that as well. Join our subtext community. News going directly out to you. No need to camp out around a message board and have to deal with all these trolls. Now, whenever something you need to know is out there, we'll just get it to you. May not be regular. It's kind of as needed, but whenever you want it, it is there. So check out the subtext community. Sign up for that. It's like a 2-week free trial at the moment. So pretty cool. Now, Ole Miss hired a new analyst over the last couple of days. Matt Zenitz came out with it. His name is Lou Spanos. He coached as a defensive coordinator at UCLA with Jim Mora Jr. He went to UConn. He actually was an interim coach back in 2021. But that's not important. That's on the field stuff. He's being hired as an off the field person. And if you look at him as a coach, he's coached with the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Washington Redskins, UCLA, the Tennessee Titans, and was an analyst at Alabama in 2018, assuming that is with Pete Golding. So that's something to keep in mind. Whenever you're installing a system, find somebody that's done it with you before, and I think that has happened. Somebody you can bounce ideas off of. I think that is happening. I think Lou Spanos is going to do a fantastic job in installing this defense at Ole Miss, and his job as an analyst. Now, I think it's important to know. An analyst's job, there's a lot of self-scout. There's a lot of opponent scouts. A lot of this stuff that used to be the groundwork of a 20-hour day of college football coaches, now you can split it up a little bit. Now recruiting has become such a big part. You need people to take things off the plate, and other people can do this. So you may have something where they're looking at only 3rd and 7 to 10, and trying to come up with a scheme for the opponent in that. Maybe your self-scout, they're looking at, hey, what are we doing on short yardage or our goal line? How does that look exactly? Maybe you're recruiting transfer portal players for your system, and they're another set of eyes to make sure they are a fit for what you do, because as you know, I talk all the time, system is everything. So an analyst, they're able to take the workload off of the coaching staff. Those 10 on-the-road coaches, and I'm calling them on the road instead of on the field because recruiting is more important for what they do. So we'll see exactly how this goes. Now, I like to hire as an analyst. I think the experience there is going to help them. Whenever Jeff Lebby came to Ole Miss and all those Baylor coaches came with him, it's because install it can be difficult. So whenever you're putting in a new system, it's going to be important that people are there that know how you want to do things. And Lou Spanos, as obviously you can see, has been there. He's handled that. And that is pretty impressive for him. Now, the flip side of this is the analyst position, while necessary, is a product of the inflated salaries, the inflated revenue, like we talk about. Ole Miss, their athletic budget was $30 million 15 years ago. Now it's like 110, 120. What's happened? Well, TV revenue is skyrocketed. Now, if you look at the rest of the country and everything that's going on with these streaming services and them trying to figure out how to monetize it, because they haven't quite figured out how to do that. They've overpaid on sports because live sports has been the only thing that's been making them money. So live sports has carried the water essentially for the networks, the streaming service, the whole 9 yards. But the problem is they're still not making a huge money. They're still gouging you on. They're raising rates all the time. They're trying to find an equilibrium. And I think what we're seeing and what we're starting to see is the fact that these content shows that we all love, the 1923s, the 1883s, they're eventually going to go away. Unless you're not overpaying on sports. Maybe Paramount is not overpaying on sports. CBS is not over. They obviously didn't with the SEC. But I think this is a bubble. It doesn't match the rest of the country. Everybody else is kind of hurting financially and trying to figure out how to make money. Even on these broadcast streaming services, they're losing money and overpaying on live sports. That just doesn't seem like a long-term sustainable model. So we'll see exactly what this happens. Is coaching salaries going to come down? Are the number of analysts going to come down? We'll see exactly how this goes. But I think you're about to see college sports athletic budgets kind of regress to the mean, especially in the age of NIL when schools are actually competing with NIL collectives for the same dollar. People are going to start diverting their money to those NIL things because those things can actually affect what we care about, which is results on the field. So we'll see exactly what's going on with that. Anyway, in the next segment, we're going to have Brantley Sanderson. We're going to talk about Ole Miss and Louisville in the Sweet 16 in women's basketball. Is this sustainable? All those questions. About 12 minutes with Brantley right after this. Stick around. All right, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Do us a favor, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the bell for notifications, comment down below, and, of course, upvote the video itself. I'm here with Brantley Sanderson. We're talking a little Lady Rebs basketball as they get ready for the Sweet 16. This is going to air on Thursday, so that would be tomorrow. How you doing, Brantley?
Man, I'm feeling really sweet today. To go from 0-16 to the Sweet 16, I mean, you can't find many better stories in basketball right now than that. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, and whenever I left Ole Miss and left Oxford, Mississippi and moved away, it was 2007. So it was right after that run by Carol Ross and Armini Price and all those girls to go to the Elite Eight. They eventually got beat by the Tennessee Vols. Tennessee won the national championship, which they were prone to do back in the day. But after that, we hit a little bit of a valley. I mean, all of that happened. Well, I think it was Adrian Wiggins when he came in. Probation followed. And that led to that 0-16 season to where Coach Yo basically inherited a team that was not even really D1 level. And she has slowly built this over time, and they've recruited and they've hit the transfer portal. And now you look at them, they're like 24-8. Something like that, give or take. I may be a little bit off. But half of their losses are to top 5 teams. And yet they're still looked at as an 8 seed. They were not ranked during the whole season. This team has been criminally underrated throughout this whole process. And now just might be another step on that journey because I'm assuming everybody thinks that Louisville is going to win this game as well.
Totally. I mean, first of all, they were criminally underseeded. This team is way better than an 8 seed. But I think that's also, that probably has just as much to do with how the SEC was just underrated this year. There was a lot of talk that that SEC was just South Carolina and LSU this year. Well, anybody that was paying attention knew that there was a lot better teams because, it was just a dogfight every single night. And like you said, this team has 0 bad losses. I mean, the only one that you might put in that category was the overtime loss to Auburn. But Auburn went to the WNIT, so they're a postseason team. And, sometimes the important thing is the team learned from that loss. And you saw them the next time they had an overtime game on an opponent's home court, they won. And that's what I really like about this team. At the beginning of the year, I was excited, but I really had no idea how all these pieces were going to come together. Like you said, she really hit the transfer portal hard. So there were some new pieces that, you just don't know how they're going to turn out. But they have really, she always said she wanted her team to be playing their best basketball in February and March. And that's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, and the one concerning thing that I've seen going forward, and I think this is absolutely correctable and it's going to work itself out, but the team had a tendency to play tight in the fourth quarter, and that happened against Stanford as well. They made one basket in the fourth quarter. If it wasn't for good free throw shooting, Stanford might have come all the way back and won that game. Luckily for Ole Miss, the game was in its defense's hands. They needed to defend and make a play, and they were much more comfortable doing that. They did what they normally do, and that is force a turnover, a bad pass, something out of the ordinary for the Stanford Cardinal, and this Ole Miss team was able to pull away, and you could see them almost excel. Brantley, do you think in this Louisville game, Ole Miss has a 7-point lead in the fourth quarter? Do you think they will tighten up even more, or will we see a little more looser team?
No, I think, now they've been there. I don't think you can understate how big of a deal that win was to go on Stanford's home court, a number one seed, a team that has been to the Sweet 16 since, I think, 2008. They've been in the national championship game 2 out of the last 3 years. They won one of those. And they had a lot of players still on that team. Both of their All-Americans had all of that experience. They played South Carolina earlier this year and took them to overtime. But I know that exact moment that you're talking about in the fourth quarter. I think it was with about 4 or 5 minutes left. You could just see it showed on all of their faces and in their body language that it was the doubt might have been starting to creep in. But whatever Coach Yo told them in that timeout, she pressed the right buttons, and you could, just like you said, it was like they almost just excelled. I think with Louisville, they are a very similar team. The thing that I liked most about what we did with Stanford is from the tip-off, we set the tone. Stanford was never comfortable. They did make that little run at the end, but I think as soon as they tied it, we went right back down and hit a shot and maintained the lead. It might have been the only shot we had, the only field goal we had in the whole fourth quarter, but that's when going 10 of 12 from the free throw line is going to help you. But that was also on their home court. This is going to be in Seattle. I'm sure Louisville travels well. They're a team that's got a ton of experience. They've been to the Final Four. I think they went last year, if I'm not mistaken. So their players have been there. Now I think, what's really interesting, I think if you look back maybe, 3 years ago when they went to the WNIT, there's been a lot of talk on Twitter about how both Ole Miss and Colorado were two of the final teams that went to the whatever the WNIT's Final Four is. That experience laid the groundwork for what you're seeing now, which is what's interesting if you look at a team like Duke and Kara Lawson, who I think has done a really good job in the 2 or 3 years that she's been there. They turned down the WNIT invitation last year. They just lost on their home court at the very end of the game. So I think you can kind of see how that experience, there's no substitute for it. When you have that much on the line, your entire season is on the line at the end of a game like that, you can't simulate that in practice. So yeah, I think the fact, that they've got that experience to draw on. And again, I think the SEC, we've got 4 SEC teams in the Sweet 16. The conference schedule prepared those teams in a way that these other teams have just not seen. The ACC with Louisville, they've had a bit of a down year. I think they only have maybe 2 or 3 teams, and they had several teams in the top 25 all year long. So I would much rather go into this game with that SEC schedule experience than an ACC schedule experience. But yeah, that they, talking about Louisville, they're very similar. They've got a lefty point guard, Haley Van Lith. She was a honorable mention All-American. I mean, she's really, really a good player. But there's a lot of similarities in terms of athleticism. They don't shoot a lot of threes, neither do we. But we've got players who can make them. And they're just really physical and tough down low. They're not going to, overwhelm you with size. They're not a South Carolina, or they're not a Stanford who starts, 6'4" and 6'5" and 6'6". So I think it's going to be close. I think the styles are really, really similar. They both like to play hard defense and run up and down the court and share the ball. So it's going to be really interesting to see who comes out on top of that.
Yeah, what's the road forward for Coach O and the Lady Rebs, though?
Look, I was thinking about this earlier today. I can't think of another win that is more important for the trajectory of a program. I mean, the entire basketball world, not just women's college basketball, it was the lead story on ESPN Sunday night. The entire world was talking about Coach O. And I mean, you can't, the interviews that she gave afterwards, especially when she was so emotional. I mean, when you've got other fan bases who are just straight up rooting for her online, like she's really taken this moment and brought people along this journey with her. She's so transparent. She's talked about the struggles. And I think people were really rooting for her to get this win. And players want to play for her. Like, how could you not watch that game and watch her enthusiasm and her excitement and the way she loves her players and the way her players reacted to her after the game? That's the kind of coach that players want to play for. So I think in terms of the trajectory, this just gives us a level of exposure that we haven't had, in the modern era. And I think people, again, there were a lot of doubters that after, the Shakira Austin, our lottery pick from last year, graduated, that to me was the real test of, can you sustain this? Is this just a good team, or is this a good program? And I think she's proven that this is what we can come to expect now from this program.
Yeah, and Coach O had a amazing quote whenever she just said that I was not the first call that Ole Miss made, but I was the right call. And I love that confidence that probably is enthusiastic to her players. Everybody can sense that. But the footing that she's on right now is unbelievable. It probably not since Carol Ross, honestly, has any Ole Miss women's basketball coaches really been there. But the gold standard for Ole Miss is always going to be Van Chancellor. That era. How sustainable is this, and how close is Coach O to getting Ole Miss back to that level?
I think we're right there knocking on the door, where this, going to the second round and beyond of the tournament every year is going to be the expectation. I think what's different now is the parity. And you're starting to see that. We weren't the only 8 seed that beat a number 1. I think actually Miami was a 9 seed. They beat number 1 Virginia Tech on their home court the next night. That's the first time that's happened. A number 1 seed didn't make it to the second round, I think, since 2009. So that's just a reflection of transfer portal, NIL. It's just a lot easier to build a program and build it quickly. And I think now she's really gotten over that hump with, whether it's the signature win or the attention that comes from it. She knows how to use her wins as building blocks for what's next. She proved that last year with the class that she brought in from the transfer portal. I'm really, I'm trying not to look ahead because this is so much fun for right now, but I'm really excited to see how I think it'll be very telling how this translates into who comes in next, because she's got a really, really good high school. She's not one of those, she's used the transfer portal very well, but she recruits high school very, very well. The only freshman on the team, Ayanna Thompson, true freshman, she hit 3 threes in the first half. She was the difference. The halftime score was 29-20. That was her. She's been slowly developing all year long. And I think Coach O said it. She was just ready for her moment. And something that Coach O said before is, she doesn't really get the 5 stars. She gets the 3 and 4 stars and develops them so that they're 5 stars by the time they're gone. And I think that player development is really, really, really key. She's able to take that into recruiting and say, look at Marquisha Davis. When she was at Arkansas, she might have only started a handful of games. Now she's averaging double figures, and that was only a year ago. So when you're able to take that and show players what you do with their talent, and how much better they will be when they leave your program, it's hard to compete with that if you're another school.
Yeah, thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Make sure you check out our brand new podcast, Locked On College Basketball. Everything you need to know about college basketball in one place. Plus, you get to hear from big-name experts, insiders, coaches, and players. Ole Miss is relevant on that show right now with the hiring of Chris Beard. But if you want women's college basketball, you can go to Locked On Women's College Basketball. We have that show as well, and I'm sure Ole Miss is relevant on that as well. It's Locked On College Basketball and Locked On Women's College Basketball, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Thank you, Brantley, so much for stopping by. Hopefully next week we can do this again, getting ready for a Final Four.
Oh, man, that's the dream. I can't wait.
All right, take care, buddy.
All right, thank you.